So in this video we're going to talk about array lists. Now we discussed arrays in a previous video. So array lists are sort of like arrays, but they have additional benefits. And they're what we call a collection. So with an array, we saw that when we declared it, we have to give it a size, and that's its size for good. It doesn't change. But with an array list, the size is flexible. We can just keep adding more things to it or removing things from it. The size is flexible and it can grow and grow and grow and store as many elements as we need. Array list is also a class. Because it's a class, we have access to many methods. The ones that we're interested in are add, size, get, remove, and clear. And I'm going to show you how these work. I would suggest, however, that you type into Google Java array lists and have a look at the documentation for array lists so you can see what other methods they have, because there are a lot of them. But these are the ones that we're going to be using in this subject. Add, size, get, remove, and clear. And you'll need to know those for the exam. There's a few disadvantages though. They're not as efficient as an array, and we can't store primitives. We can only store objects. So let's have a look at how array lists work. So I've declared an array list here as a field, private array list string strings. Now notice, this is new. When we declare an array list, we need to say what type it's going to store. So this can store strings. Can't store anything else, only strings. And in this line here, I've initialized the array list. And we could have done this all on one line. Let me just comment this out and copy this down here. So now it's a local variable as opposed to a field. So, and I don't actually require this here. So array list, we're declaring an array list. It's going to store strings, and I've given it a name of strings. So this is the name of the variable. Just like any other variable, I can choose that name. And I've set it equals a new array list. So we must provide a type here. So if this stored integers, we would put integer there. If it stored a student, we would put a student there, like students of this student class that we've looked at in videos in this topic. Remember though, it can only store objects, not primitives. So I couldn't type int or double with a small d. If I wanted to store ints, I'd have to declare it as an integer array list. So to add things, we use the add method. So you can see I've added hi, how are you. So I've added 4 elements to it. Now if I want to remove one, I use the index. So array lists, just like an array, have an index. So this is going to be index 0, index 1, index 2, and index 3. Remember, indexes in programming always start at 0. So this here is going to remove the element at index 1, which would be how. We can have a look if that worked by using a for each loop. We introduced for each loops in the last video. Now, just like arrays, we used a for each loop to loop through every element in an array. We can do the same thing with an array list. So remember, collection type, element type, name of the variable that I can use when I'm using the for each loop. So in this case here, I'm going to loop through the strings array list. I have to provide my element type, and then I give a reference to the element for each iteration of the loop. So this will print out everything in this array list, and we should see that this has been removed on this line. Now what I've done here is just print out something to give a break so we can see where the for each loop ended and where my next print line statement starts. So here I'm using the get method. So I'm getting the element at index 0. So this should print out hi. Then I'm just having another break to differentiate my print line statements. And now I'm using the size. This will return the size of the array list. Now the size should be one more than the highest index. If it's an array list of size 10, it's going to be index 0 to 9. Then I'm using the clear method. The clear method is going to clear everything in the array list. And just so I can see it's cleared, I'm doing another for each loop. So let's have a look at that and see how this code runs. So I'm going to compile it. I'm creating a new instance of topic 4. I'm going to test ArrayList. Okay, so we can see originally we added hi, how are you? But we removed the element at index 1, which was how. Then we've used a for each loop to loop through the array list. So we end up with hi, are you, because the how has been removed. Then you can see where I printed a break just to differentiate my print line statements. Then we got the element at index 0 using the get method, which was hi, and we can see that here. Then we printed the size, and we can see that here, 3. Then we cleared the array list, and then we printed, we used another for loop just to check that clear had worked, and we can see nothing was printed out. So that's how an array list works. So we could do a very similar thing. Let me just clear that. Here I've declared a second one. And I just wanted to show you something here. I've declared this array list, and you can declare them like this and initialize them like this. So in the declaration and the initialization, you can put the data type. That's not required here though. So this one, this array list, I've called it some integers, and it's going to store integers. And we would use it in exactly the same way, but you can see this time I'm adding integers. Now just to show you that an array list can only store one data type, I've tried to add a string to this integer array list, and we can see we've got an error here. So we can't do that. Once I declare an array list and I give it a data type, that's the only data type it can store. So I'd get an error from adding a string. We can also do this, let me just also show you one thing. If I try to do this with primitives, I'm going to get an error. Remember, array lists can only store objects. Arrays can store primitives, but an array list can only store objects. Array lists and arrays, while they might be related, remember an array is very simple. An array list is a class, so it has methods. Arrays do not. Arrays are a very simple type of collection. So an array list has a lot of additional benefits. In this case here, let me just uncomment this. In this case, I have declared an array list, and it's going to store student objects from this student class. So, once again, array list, I give it a data type, in this case a student. I'm going to call my array list students, and I've set it equals a new array list. Then we can see here I create a student. Student equals new student. I'm calling this student constructor. I'm passing it a first and a last name, because we can see a student has one constructor. It takes a first and a last name. And now I have added my student to the array list. And if I use the get method, get the element at index 0, remember this will return a student. Because it returns a student, I can now call students methods. So we've seen with array lists. Array lists, let's just go back to the slide and quickly review them. They're like an array, but they have additional advantages. Their size is flexible. Because they are a class, they have many methods. We've looked at add, we've looked at size, we've looked at get, we've looked at remove and clear. Arrays don't have these things, only array lists do. So they have a lot of advantages, but they're not as efficient as an array, and they cannot store primitives, they can only store objects.